I think I save video games and the experiences they bring in some sort of vault in my head. Because for every formative experience I've ever had in my life, formative episode, there's always a very important video game attached to it. And of course, I've been playing these things for as long as I can remember, so that's probably inevitable. But today I want to take some time to explore one of the most important lessons I've learned while playing video games. And that's how I learned to deal with anxiety and grief. Today I want to take some time and talk about one of the most important games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Overcoming pain depends on our genuine commitment to self-reflection and introspection. Do you guys know about this thing called metacognition? It's really just a concept for how people have this unique ability to both think and understand why and how they think. I came to read about metacognition purely because I was a bit down on myself. I wasn't performing to the best of my abilities, I was disappointed in myself, and I wanted to understand how I had managed to think myself into an even worse mindset. With each passing day, I, like most people, become more and more aware of my shortcomings, and it's this constant feeling of inadequacy and failure that has led to the development of modern behavioral psychotherapy. This idea, this metacognition, reminds us that we can track and understand our own grief, and that's really powerful. And I've come to realize that for me, video games are the best way to help me do this. I reflect on these experiences as supplements for processing my own grief, and they help me grow. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask is often touted as a contender for being the greatest video game ever produced. And what's holding Majora's Mask from taking that number one spot is that it deliberately tries to be absurd. It almost feels like, for someone who has played A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time, that the whole game is a parody. Everything from the characters, to the landscape, to the story, to the gameplay is familiar but entirely unique at the same time. Majora's Mask is the gaming equivalent of the phrase, "There's more to this than meets the eye." It's a game that understands itself, and one that also quickly understands why it behaves like it does. And when I started looking into this, I quickly came to understand that I love Majora's Mask so much because it approaches itself in the same way we approach ourselves, with a deliberate move towards self-awareness. Throughout my life, I've been one of the many people who has struggled with the onset of anxiety. And for those of you who have experienced it as well, you know how it feels. It's a persistent and almost gentle pain that stays in the back of your head. I kind of describe it as a hum that interrupts your breathing, like a tune that stops you from consistently doing what you need to do. And it ultimately feels like it was designed in a factory to bother you and cause you pain. And usually when I feel it the worst, I'm asking myself questions like, am I doing the best I can? Am I loved? Am I cared for? How am I maintaining the relationships that are important to me? Do I even matter? Majora's Mask opens as Link is searching the lost woods for his old friend, Navi. At this point in his life, Link has already been haunted by the calamity his decisions caused Hyrule in the events of Ocarina of Time. He saved the day, but thousands had suffered because of his mistakes. His closest friends and supporters, Saria, Zelda, Darunia, Princess Ruto, and others, had been ravaged or forced to make world-breaking choices in the wake of Ganondorf's conquest of Hyrule. Link, by now, is also well acquainted with the concepts and consequences of time manipulation. For the first time in the series, we see the consequences of trauma on the hero. Despite his ultimate triumph over the Demon King, Link has escaped fame in favor of an icy solitude. The game opens up, as I said, with Link sulking on horseback and desperately searching for that same friend Navi, who was his fairy companion in the last game and one of the most important relationships he'd ever formed in his life. Link has had the opportunity to regret and worry for every decision he has ever made, and for once in his life, he is taking initiative to understand his own emotions and pursue something that's important to him. Anxiety crushes you at your lowest point when you start to doubt yourself. And with that, there's an instant feeling of regret. And with regret, inevitably, you're gonna feel pain. In Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Illich, Ivan's life is chronicled from youth to death. But upon reaching death, completely unfulfilled, Ivan is only able to gasp one more time before realizing that his life was truly wasted. In a world without time travel, this is the fate that we are always taught to fear. You can't know if your life has been wasted until you arrive at the end. And nobody except those who are far gone can explain the level of agony and misery they feel as they're slipping away from a world in which they hoped to do so much more. Majora's Mask introduces Link as someone who is directionless from the start. But in a quick turn of events, Link must face his quest to once again save a vulnerable world. Link's recurring destiny to save Termina from destruction was not a path he chose. The events of Majora's Mask are actually entirely out of Link's control, but as is the case with most forms of anxiety, we are always dealing with circumstances and situations that we never wanted to see in the first place. We have people we want to see, goals we want to accomplish, but when a setback like anxiety or regret occurs, all we want to do is turn back the clock and go back to a time where we didn't have to worry about these things. Majora's Mask walks you through the cycle of regret and longing and desperation over and over again. And just as in the death of Ivan Illich, Link is constantly forced to look back at a life in which all his sacrifices and work had been completely in vain. We are already barely clinging to our agency over our own lives. Our own conscience consistently haunts us and asks us to look back at our choices and reassess our actions. And when uncertainty and circumstance robs us of our minimal agency, the anxiety is so painful that it puts us through intense grief. You relapse on your mistakes time and again, and each time you play the Song of Time, you deny your failures and come closer to an understanding of what hurt you. With each cycle, you awaken giants in each of the four corners of the world, and in doing so, you unlock parts of your life and existence that can stand up to fight and impede the onset of a disaster. But ultimately, the world is going to end. When people try to console your regret or your anxiety, they usually try to tell you to look for the good in the situation. There's an obsession with finding the silver lining that somehow makes the situation better. And while this does distract from the problem, it doesn't solve it. In my experience, the only way to move past your regrets and your anxieties is to understand them and come to terms with them. Once you do that, you can learn to move on. Majora's Mask taught me that you cannot expect to change the past. The game asserts that instead of longing and hoping and praying for a change in your history, you need to understand it and come to terms with it. You have to grow. And we have to reach and awaken the knowledge of our experience in order to help us confront the inevitable fate of our death. It's central to our process of metacognition. When you understand yourself and your machinations, you won't feel helpless. It's a long and grueling process, but when we look at doom in the eyes, will we feel fulfilled and supported? Or will we constantly look to an era where the course of action and result simply can't be changed? Only when you accept your circumstances, allow your giants to help you, and fight for what your life has become, will you have the power to stop the calamity from destroying you and your world. Throughout my life, I had always looked for some assurance, for someone to tell me that the regret or anxiety that I felt was going to come to pass. I wanted something to look forward to almost. And in playing Majora's Mask, I learned that this whole thing is a process that takes a lot of time and effort and dedication to overcome. It's an internal struggle that must be met with patience, hope, and a deliberate intention to be who you are and accept every experience you've ever had. Ignore expectations, go at your own pace, cast everyone's judgments to the wayside, and live and grow for yourself. After playing Majora's Mask, your fears and worries won't disappear, but the game will always preserve a hope that your life can be fulfilled, even when you think you're doomed. Majora's Mask is a beautiful reflection of our fragile humanity, but it's also a promise that we can weather any storm. When I look for examples of video games that have changed my life, I remember how Majora's Mask introduced us to a depressed and hurt hero in Link, and how his resolve, though shaky and imperfect, was powerful enough to move past his depression and take on the pressing challenges of his destiny and future. It's an incredible exploration of our character of resilience, and it's a game that helps me proudly and confidently say, I love video games. Thanks for watching.